Hello and welcome back to JQuery for designers. For our first JQuery effect, we're going to create a drop-down menu, and we're going to discover that it's actually really easy to create this using JQuery. And we're going to do this using two functions in JQuery. One of them is called slideUp, the other one is called slideDown. The slideDown function will cause our submenus to animate open, and the slideUp function will cause them to animate closed and disappear. And before we get into building this drop-down menu, I want to illustrate how these slide down and slide up functions work. And we're going to illustrate this using this slidestart.html file, which you should be able to find in your project files folder that come with this course. Now, the slidestart.html file is pointing to this particular jQuery file that we have saved in the same folder, in the project files folder. And we can take a look at it in a browser, and we can see that it's simply just a couple of paragraphs here with three buttons up at the top. One for slide up, one for slide down, one for slide toggle. And as you can see, none of these buttons work just yet. So let's jump into whatever text editor you're using, and we'll open up that slidestart.html file. And it will really behoove you to open this up and follow along, to enter in the code as I'm entering it in, because you will learn a lot better if you do this instead of just watching the video. If you follow along and enter in the code yourself, then it will really stick. So what we have here is we have our initial script tag inside the head, which is pointing to our jQuery file. And then we have another script element here. And inside this script element, we're going to enter in our own code. And then in the body, we have three button elements with different classes applied to them for closing, opening, and toggling the sliding of our paragraph. And then we have two paragraphs, and the first paragraph is the one we're going to animate. It has a class of slider applied to it. So we're going to use these class names in our jQuery. So we're going to start inside our script element here, and always remember before you start entering in your jQuery code to include your document ready function. So you need to always remember to do that. So we're going to do that here. We're going to type $, open parentheses, and then we'll type in the word function, again, open and close parentheses, space, and then we'll put our opening curly bracket, skip a couple lines, and we'll have our closing curly bracket, our closing parenthesis, and a semicolon to end our statement. So you really need to memorize this particular function, this document ready function, because you're going to be using it over and over again if you decide to stick with jQuery. So all of our code will go inside this function. So let's start just by turning to this slider class and telling it to slide up. And remember, the slide up function is the one that's going to animate it off, and it will disappear. So the way we do that is we point to that slider class, and again, the way we point to something in jQuery is we type a $, and then inside parentheses and inside quotation marks, we'll put the CSS selector for whatever item we want to point to. Well, we want to point to the slider class, so if we want to point to a class, we type dot and then the class name, which in this case is slider. And then after the closing parenthesis, we'll type dot and then whatever jQuery function we want to apply to that class. Well, here I want to use the slide up function, and the way we type that is we type slide with all lowercase letters and then up with a capital U. Then we need our opening and closing parentheses there, semicolon to end our statement, and then we're good to go. So let's save this, and I want to save this with a new name, excuse me. I don't want to save over the starter file, so let's save this as slide-final.html, and then we'll open up slide final in Chrome and take a look at it. Now you'll notice as soon as our page loads, we see two paragraphs there, but the first paragraph immediately animated off, and that's what the slide up function does. We can refresh our page to see it happen again. So the slide up function will animate it up and it will disappear, and anything that shows up below that content is going to move up into the empty space that it left behind. Well, what if we don't want it to happen as soon as the page loads? What if we want it to happen as a result of clicking on this slide up button? Well, there's another function in jQuery called click, and it's a shortcut for handling a click event. So it will listen for a click, and when we click, it will run a custom function. So let's talk about how that works. We'll jump back into our code, and let's just nudge this slide up code down a little bit. And now let's point to that slide up button, which as we can see has a class of close-btn. So I'm going to put our opening $sign there, and then inside parentheses and inside semicolons, we'll point to that button class, which again is called close button. So we'll type dot close -btn, and then after the closing parenthesis here, we're going to point to the click method in jQuery. And the way we do that is we type dot click, open and close parentheses, semicolon to end our statement, and then the click method or the click function is expecting something inside the parentheses, and what it's expecting is another function. So we're going to create a function here by typing function, open and close parentheses, and then our open and closed curly brackets. Now let's nudge our closing curly bracket down a couple of lines. So we have our closing curly bracket, closing parenthesis, ending semicolon, all nudged down. And then inside this function, we're going to put our slideUp function. So let's cut that slideUp function and paste it inside this function up here. So now this slideUp function is not going to run until we click on this close button, which is this button right here. So let's try that. We'll save our file, go back to our browser and refresh. And we see that now when our page loads, our paragraph doesn't disappear. But if we click on our slide up button, we see it animate off. So we can create that kind of interactivity using just a couple lines of code here. We just have 3 simple lines of code. So let's see the slide down function in action. So we have our slide down button here, which has a class of open-btn. So I'm just going to highlight this close button function up here, copy it, skip a couple lines and paste it. So instead of the close button, we're going to point to the open-btn class, and we're going to create a click event for that. And inside that click event, we have this new function running where we're going to slide down instead of sliding up. So we're going to delete up here and type down with a capital D. So notice there's no spaces here. It's just slide down with a capital D. So let's save that, refresh our page, and in order to slide down, we first need to slide it up. So we'll slide it up to make it animate off, and then we can click on slide down to animate it back on. Well, there's an easier way to do this, and that's using the slide toggle function. And we're not actually going to use the slide toggle function in our drop-down menu, but I do want to show it to you that it's there and that it's easy to use. And the slide toggle function, as you might imagine, allows us to click on this button over and over again, and it will just toggle back and forth between the slide up and slide down functions. So let's go back to our code and let's create a third function here. So let's highlight our open button function, copy it, skip a couple lines and paste it. And next we're going to be pointing to our toggle button here, which has a class of toggle-btn. So we're going to replace .openBTN with .toggle-btn. And for the click function there, instead of slide down, we're going to have slide toggle. So let's see if that works. Save our file. Again, make sure that you capitalize the T in toggle. We'll save our file, jump back into our browser and refresh. And now if we just ignore slide up and slide down and just click on slide toggle, and click on it again, we can see that it just toggles back and forth between the slide up and the slide down functions. So you can click on that as many times as you want to, and it will just keep alternating between animating it off and animating it back on. And that's how the slide up, slide down, and slide toggle functions work in jQuery. So thank you for watching, and in the next video we'll get started building.